Enable.
The second edition of the India Mobile Congress was recently held in New Delhi. The annual symposium saw industry partners, policymakers, and tech companies deliberate over what new technologies will emerge in the future and how they will impact various industries and markets in the country. The biggest highlight this year was the 5G telecommunication technology that's imminent to debut as early as next year in the US first, followed by other countries. India hopes to be in line with the 5G launch, which is why major tech companies presented their roadmaps at the IMC 2018. The theme for the conference this year was New Digital Horizons, Connect, Create, Innovate. And some of the eminent speakers included the Minister of State for Communications and Railways, Manoj Sinha, and European Commission for Digital Single Market, and Vice President European Commission's Andreas Ansip.
India is one of the most open economies in the world and is advancing rapidly towards development across all sectors. There has been a qualitative transformation in the telecom sector, paving way for major disruptions to act as a catalyst for innovation. The government has been in its full support to re-energize the telecom sector, which is the foundation of India riding on the digital wave. The telecom sector has witnessed phenomenal growth while reaching to a mobile subscriber base of more than 1.1 billion. The recent rollout of 4G networks in India has surprised many in the international community at its speed, scope and scale. In the short span of just under 2 years, India has an aggregate data consumption exceeding both the USA and China combined, with prices that are the envy of the world. The aim is now to digitally empower the citizen while opening up new horizon of next generation possibilities. And that can only happen when the policy makers and the telecom industry have a unidirectional approach. The pace of change seems to be growing exponentially. Therefore, after many deliberations and discussions, the Union Cabinet recently approved the National Digital Communication Policy 2018, which is hailed as a landmark policy in the field of communications. The policy has set articulated futuristic goals and has undertaken crucial policy initiatives to address the problem of access to take India towards a vibrant digital economy. The policy aims to provision of broadband for all, create 4 million additional jobs in the digital communication sectors, enhance the contribution of the digital communication sector to 8% of India's GDP from 6% in 2017, propel India to the top 50 nations in the ICT Development Index of ITU from 134 in 2017, enhance India's contribution to global value chain and ensure digital sovereignty. NDCP will serve as the main pillar of Digital India by addressing emerging opportunities for expanding not only availability of telecom services but also telecom-based services. A signature focus of the policy is that it will emphasize the achievement of the UN Sustainable Development Goals as part of its criteria for success. We are all very excited to welcome 5G, which will connect people and everything. The previous generations of mobile networks were aimed at connecting people with people and people with things. However, 5G will connect everything with everything and thus become the next frontier in machine-to-machine communication.
Thank you to our Honourable Minister for that welcome address. And with that, I'd like to request the Honourable Andreas Ansip, European Commissioner for Digital Single Market and Vice President, the European Commission, to address the audience. Mr. Ansip, sir.
Honourable Minister Sinha, honourable guests, ladies and gentlemen, it's my great pleasure to be back here in India again. When it comes to going digital, India and the European Union face several similar challenges. It is perhaps not surprising that our plans for a digital future have a lot in common. They are driven by similar demands from people, business and industry for more data, better online access, improved digital services, public and private. I'm pleased to see India's progress in drafting a national data protection law. This could hopefully pave the way for EU-India adequacy discussions in the future and also facilitate greater data flows between us. Strong data protection is one thing. Cybersecurity is another. As consumers become more data hungry, as we depend more on digital products and services, we also face more threats online. Last year, 80% of European companies suffered at least one cybersecurity incident. But we are all at risk, no matter which country. We saw the international reach of cybercrime with large-scale attacks like NotPetya and WannaCry, which hit IT systems across the world and disrupted essential services such as transport and healthcare. No country can respond on its own to these threats. We are better protected when we work together, developing the best possible capabilities in key areas like the Internet of Things, cyber intelligence, intrusion detection, anti-malware software. In Europe, we have taken steps to strengthen cyber resilience, promote research and innovation, all backed up by the first EU-wide rules on cybersecurity.
A special keynote was also given by Ajit Pai, Chairman US Federal Communications Commission, on the regulatory landscape in the new digital ecosystem.
It is a personal privilege to be at this conference. I was born in the United States, but my family's roots, of course, are here in India. Personal reasons aside, this would be a special visit for any FCC chairman, and that is because the United States and India have a very important relationship. As the world's oldest and largest democracies, respectively, we share common values and strategic interests. And accordingly, our governments and industries work closely together to promote mutual growth and prosperity. A study from researchers at New York University that came out earlier this month makes the point, is that startup activity and venture capital have become increasingly global. American innovation hubs are thriving, but we have seen the remarkable rise of new startup hotbeds, many of which are here in India. From 2015 to 2017, only America and China attracted more venture investment than India. And just looking at the number of deals by city, Delhi was 8th in the world and Bangalore was 10th. And so looking at growth, and additionally, the number of deals in Delhi was up 400% over the past 3 years compared to 2010 to 2012. And what I love about this emerging global digital economy is that it isn't a zero-sum game. All of us can enjoy the benefits of growth and jobs and quality of life improvements that come with these new ideas. And that underscores the need for international engagement and the sharing of best practices.
Showcasing India's digital journey towards becoming an empowered global knowledge economy, the speakers of one of the panel discussions discussed the essential changes that are needed across legacy regulations and how this can be achieved.
Regulation should not translate into micromanagement. Do you agree with that assessment that we shouldn't have micromanagement, or is that perhaps too stark a picture that we need perhaps light-handed regulation? Is that the answer forward as we move towards perhaps 5G data, a lot of issues to discuss?
I think if we start adopting heavy-handed regulation right from the inception, we would be paying a heavy price, because you would certainly be, making it that much more difficult to innovate, for new entrants to come in, for new services to develop. So I think definitely what is needed in this area is really to, first of all, let the thing develop. You know, by the time you start seeing a green shoot, you can't assume this is the fruit of the tree and, you know, this is poisonous, therefore I'm not going to allow it. So I think we will have to allow that to acquire some traction. Thereafter, maybe if we are finding challenging areas, you can experiment with soft regulation.
Mr. Sharma, let me get your thoughts on this. As far as India is concerned, you're at the forefront of regulation. You are the direct interface between the regulator and, of course, various service providers. So how do you balance both the sides? On one hand, on enforcement of the statute of the law. On the other, light-handed regulation.
Ultimately, every action, either by regulator or by government, should have some purpose and some objective. You can't take action without any objective in mind. So where you don't see a problem, you should not really intervene. You should intervene only when you see a problem. But I certainly agree that the overall objective of the regulation should be a light touch regulation, not regulating where it is not necessary. And you must always do an impact analysis in terms of the cost. Because what is the regulatory cost? You know, you may prescribe a regulation, but how much cost it will incur for the industry to comply with that? That also has to be kept in mind. And you should certainly have a very, and I must say that the industry in our country has matured. And therefore, there are many areas where you can just leave. And I also agree that, regulation always precedes the events. You can't sort of forecast, you can't sort of figure out as to what is going to happen. So therefore, let the free flow of things be allowed to happen for some time.
You're saying essentially regulation has to be reactive. Mats, if I may just get you in on the conversation. Your thoughts on, again, big data, nobody doubts their competence, the powers that it possesses. Just a word though, perhaps there is a little bit of hand-holding that's required.
Today, 2/3 of the world's population are connected. So 5.6 billion people are connected to some sort of cellular phone. And if you go back just 20 years, that was 4% of the world's population. And now it's 67 or almost 70%. And here in India, 15 years ago, was low single-digit percentage points connected. Today, 740 million individual subscribers. That's 60-odd% of the population. And that is the new digital ecosystem. And how will that's a tremendous speed, tremendous force in using this device. And it's truly changing the way that we do business, the way that we communicate and interact with each other. Now, how shall the regulator be able to regulate this vibrant industry? And I think I concur with what has said before here, that it needs to be a light touch. It needs to be intelligently enough to let go. And then when you see bottlenecks being created, then you go in and you try to regulate it.
Let's get some thoughts in from Mr. Johannes as well. Europe, it's known to be one of the firmest jurisdictions in terms of enforcement of the law, in terms of data security, in terms of telecom. Do you believe that now perhaps there is a need to balance, on one hand, of course, the interests of the customers, and on the other, the interests of the industry? How do you balance both the sides? Europe has a history of being very firm. GDPR is one example where we have seen some very firm regulations come into place, put very high compliance burdens in some cases as far as companies are concerned. How do you again balance the two?
Maybe as a part of the answer, I have to explain a little bit where Europe comes from. Number one, it is important to understand that 20 years ago, the first task of regulators was to break up the monopoly of the legacy copper networks. So, and at that point in time, it was really a very heavy-handed regulation to break up networks, open up for competition. We had 18 markets on retail level, on wholesale level. We regulated every single of them in order to give users a choice, to not only have the one single network they can be connected to, but to have more choice on a service level. We have dramatically reduced this regulation over the last 20 years. And we are now down to a very low number of markets on an infrastructure level, on a wholesale level, where we still regulate in a traditional way. This is the telecom regulation, where we want to have competition, because competition drives, on the one hand side, investment, and gives end users the choice and high quality at a very reasonable price. So competition is the one thing we are focusing on. And this gives, from our perspective, the right incentives to invest and the right level of protection for end users. Now, coming into the new digital era, things from my perspective get a little bit more complicated, because there are so many levels of regulation, so many areas. If you think of all the discussion on level playing field between new players and the old players, and this level playing field plays into areas like taxation, data protection, audiovisual media regulation, and so on. And of course, data protection as well. So there are a whole variety of areas where we have to find this right balance between protecting end users and, on the other hand side, not eliminate the incentives for investment. Mentioning GDPR, I'm not sure whether this is a very heavy-handed or not regulation. In Europe, the most important thing is to understand that we are 28 independent member states, and in each and every member state we have our own regulation. And the most important task of such a regulation is to level it out and to have one regulation for whole Europe. That's number one. And number two is, of course, to balance it in the right way, to create a level playing field between new digital players and traditional players. And this is the second very important aspect of this GDPR, to create this level playing field. On taxation, it's the same. We found out that digital players pay in average roughly 9% in tax, and traditional players paid more than 20%. So to create a level playing field, this is the most important target and goal for European regulation.
Mr. Pai, let me get you in on this conversation as well. When we speak of an evolving digital environment, one of the key issues, of course, is data security. GDPR is one issue where the interests, there needed to be common interests that needed to be established. Without commenting on whether or not GDPR is heavy-handed or not, in India, here locally, of course, we're in the process of coming out with our own legislation. One of the initiatives in that direction, of course, has been data localization. For payment banks, at least, to be specific, there is a requirement for data localization. Would you term that perhaps as a heavy-handed approach? How do you see that debate evolve in terms of data localization perhaps being the answer for protecting data?
So I suppose, generally speaking, the United States approach has been to require certain privacy protections across the entire internet ecosystem, whether it is a content provider or a network operator. We would expect them to abide by certain basic principles of privacy and data protection. And so that, I think, is generally the American approach to ensuring that the data is protected against any sort of profit motive that might otherwise compromise consumer interests. And so I think, with respect to data localization, again, every country, of course, will have to make its own decisions, but I would hope at the end of the day that a careful calibration of privacy and data security regulation that applies to everybody would ultimately be a better guarantor, as opposed to essentially a balkanized system in which every country in the world might have different requirements depending on what country and what type of service and the like. And I think ultimately this is a debate that's going to be ongoing. There are no easy solutions to it.
Fair enough. An ongoing debate, most certainly. I would like to conclude here. I hope we've learned and we've gained something from this conversation. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, everyone. Gentlemen, ma'am, it was lovely speaking to you, and thank you so much.